What would you think if I told you that silence can leave a louder scar than screaming ever could? She didn't beg. She didn't bargain. She didn't flood him with essays of pain or paragraphs of proof. She just went quiet, and that silence, unapologetic, unmoved, unedited, echoed through him longer than any storm. Because some women don't announce their exit. They vanish the moment they realize they were never truly seen. And in that void, something strange happens to a man. He doesn't just miss her voice, he starts hearing his own. This is not the tale of the cool girl, nor the emotionally detached siren who plays aloof to bait a man. No, this is the feminine force that withdraws not to punish, but to protect. To reclaim the fragments of herself she gave to someone who was never ready to hold them. Most men don't understand it at first. When she stops explaining, stops overgiving, stops softening her truth to make him feel powerful. He mistakes it for peace. He believes is finally won. That the fire has been tamed. That the challenge, the mystery, is over. But that is his ego talking. And the ego, when left unchecked, will celebrate a woman's retreat as his own victory. Until her silence becomes a mirror. And that mirror begins to reflect everything he refused to face. You see, Jung said that what we reject in ourselves, we project onto others. And what a man cannot accept in his own shadow, he will punish in a woman's truth. So when she stopped talking, it wasn't surrender. It was an initiation. Silence, in the language of the feminine, is not emptiness. It is storm. It is boundary. It is the rebirth of the sacred self. And for the man, the one who mistook her devotion for decoration, her empathy for naivety, her softness for weakness, he learns the lesson only after she's gone. He learns it late at night, when her absence is louder than her presence ever was. When he scrolls through old messages, searching for the exact moment her energy shifted. Trying to decode the silence he once dismissed as indifference. But it wasn't indifference. It was exhaustion. It was the moment she realized her explanations were being used as ammunition. That every time she spoke her heart, he dissected it, not to understand her, but to defend himself. So she stopped, and he was left with nothing but the sound of his own defenses crumbling in an empty room. Some women are remembered not for how they begged to be loved, but for how they quietly walked away when they weren't. You might think men forget. You might believe they move on, find someone new, smile for photos and bury the past. But memory doesn't work like that. The body remembers. The psyche stores every unspoken wound. And when a woman has touched a man beyond his mask, beyond the performance, she becomes unforgettable not by force, but by presence. He remembers her not as the girl who chased, but as the woman who saw, and said nothing, because in that nothing, she said everything. He looks for her now, not in the women he touches, but in the spaces between conversations, where the words don't land, where the laughter doesn't taste the same. He listens for her silence in the wrong mouths, longing for the gravity she carried in her stillness. Because her silence wasn't passive. It was full of knowing, full of restraint, full of the power to no longer explain a truth that he had proven he could not hold. Most women aren't born with this kind of silence. They are carved into it, bit by bit, over years of emotional labor and bending themselves into comprehension for men who never reciprocated the effort. And when the last piece breaks, when she finally chooses herself over the need to be understood, her silence becomes sacred. Men don't fear the woman who screams. They know how to disarm her, dismiss her, call her crazy, too much, emotional. But the woman who falls silent terrifies him. Because now, it's his mind doing the screaming. Now, it's his projection with nowhere to land. He begins to spiral, not because she's loud, but because she's no longer a mirror for his noise. Jung spoke of the anima, the feminine within the male unconscious. A man disconnected from his anima is doomed to chase it externally, falling in love with women not for who they are, but for the pieces of himself he sees in them. She was one of those women. But unlike the others, she didn't stay to be worshipped or blamed. She didn't try to carry his soul on her back or fix his fragmented ego with her softness. She saw his darkness, and didn't flinch, but she also saw his refusal to face it. And that, she could not carry. So she left, not in fury, not in chaos, but in the quiet dignity of someone who finally understands, her energy is currency. And he is too bankrupt to afford it. He remembers her now in symbols. A scent on a stranger's coat. A sentence in a book she once quoted. The pause in a song before the chorus breaks. She haunts not like a ghost, but like a goddess. A divine echo of the woman he could not meet on her level, because he was too busy anchoring her to his. This is the pain men never admit. The wound they carry beneath the bravado, not the loss of a woman, but the loss of the man they could have become with her. Because the right woman doesn't just touch your body. She exposes your shadow. She opens the wound that you've kept stitched shut. And then stands back, watching if you dare to clean it out, or run from it once again. She said nothing, but in that silence, she asked the one question he'll never stop hearing. Are you ready to meet the parts of yourself I already knew? Quote. He tries to answer her now, but only in dreams. She's not really there, of course. Just a flicker, a feeling. A memory walking barefoot across the back of his mind. He chases her through half-remembered nights and blurred images of conversations he didn't truly hear at the time. She's always just out of reach, but the ache is precise. Not for her lips, not for her body, but for the way her presence confronted the emptiness in his own. Men are taught to conquer, to claim, to fix. They are not taught how to receive a woman who sees them, sees through them, and does not flinch. That kind of woman becomes a mirror too clear to bear. She watched him posture, defend, avoid, deny. She saw the child hiding behind the man. And not with judgment, but with clarity. And when she stopped speaking, he realized how loud the echo of his own avoidance had become. Her silence wasn't withdrawal, it was revelation. She had simply stepped aside and let him see himself. Some women love by softening. Others love by disappearing, not as a punishment, but as a final offering. An invitation for the man to face himself, without the cushion of her validation. Without the sweetness of her forgiveness. Without the false comfort of believing she'll always explain herself one more time. When she was there, he misunderstood her mystery for complication. Her self-protection for distance. Her inner world for drama. He tried to decode her like a puzzle he didn't believe was worth solving, until the puzzle walked away, and he realized it was a map. A map he no longer had access to. So now he writes her in his mind. Rehearses conversations that never happened. Imagines what he would say, if only he could find her again. But it isn't her he's chasing anymore. It's the man he might have become if he'd listened. If he'd sat still. If he'd held space instead of holding control. Jung called it individuation, the soul's calling to integrate its shadow, to become whole by facing the unloved, unseen, unfaced parts within. She was a catalyst. She was the door. And he closed it. The worst part? She didn't lock it. He did. With pride. With ego. With noise. And now, every woman after her feels quieter. Not because they are, but because his inner world is still shouting her name into empty hallways. You can't forget the woman who mirrored your unconscious. You can't erase the one who loved you enough to stop speaking and let your silence expose you. Because that's when the real storm begins. Now he dates women who laugh louder, explain more, forgive faster. They soothe his ego, but they don't see his soul. And that comforts him, until the quiet comes. Until the moment between conversations, when no one's performing, and his mind drifts. To her, to the woman who sat across from him and didn't fill the silence. Didn't fawn, didn't flinch, she simply was. And that was held centuries. It was a stillness he mistook for absence. Because he hadn't yet met the part of himself that could sit in stillness too. He remembers her not for what she gave him, but for what she awakened. She held the line between being seen and being consumed. She didn't sell her truth for closeness. She didn't soften herself into his idea of love. Some women are not storms, they are mirrors in the dark, and if a man isn't ready, he will blame the reflection. But here's the truth, the man she left behind was not the man she once loved. He was the man who clung to comfort, who spoke in performance. Who needed her to dilute her depth so he wouldn't drown. She was not cold, she was whole, and her silence was not punishment, it was prophecy. It foretold the man he might become if he ever chose to step beyond his persona. Jung wrote that we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And that is what she did. She stood as a living question he refused to answer. Now, in his sleep, he revisits the garden of their conversations. Not to relive the sweetness, but to rewrite the endings. To say the words he choked on. To undo the armor he wore. But even in dreams, she doesn't speak. And that, more than anything, breaks him. Because deep down, he knows the silence is no longer hers. It's his. The echo of all the things he never dared to feel. The love he never matured enough to meet. The version of himself he abandoned. And so he becomes haunted, not by her absence, but by the presence of what her absence left behind. A wound shaped like a woman who refused to beg for understanding. A memory made not of words, but of the feeling of being fully seen, and walking away from it. You don't forget a woman like that. Not because she was loud, but because she never had to be. He sees her in places she never stood. Not because she haunts him like a ghost, but because his soul recognizes her as a symbol. The symbol of the thing he fled, the truth he wasn't ready to hold. She became his unfinished sentence. The page he left unread. The lesson he tried to skip, only to find it written into every chapter that came after. It wasn't her body he missed. It was the way her silence unraveled him. Because she didn't try to fix him. She didn't offer false comfort. She simply held space, and in that space, his ego felt naked. Most men chase women who echo their beliefs. She was the anomaly, a woman who mirrored his shadow and didn't blink. And when a woman like that stopped speaking, a man is forced to hear his own inner noise. The voices is silenced, the grief he never named, the rage disguised as logic, the longing buried beneath bravado. Do you know what that does to a man who's built himself on illusions? It shakes the throne he never earned. It makes him realize the kingdom was made of sand. You see, a woman who embodies the feminine void doesn't need to withdraw. She is withdrawal, a gravitational pull back into the self. Not into chaos, but into the silence before the ego was born. And that is why he remembers her. Not because she tried to be unforgettable, but because she let go. And when she let go, she became myth. Not the screaming kind, not the dramatic rupture, but the slow, sacred kind, the one that echoes through the bones of every woman who ever chose self-respect over fear. The man tells himself she was too much, or too cold, or too complicated. But none of that is true. She was simply too real for the mask he still refused to take off. And here's what most women don't realize: when you stop talking, when you stop explaining, when you stop handing him mirrors he keeps shattering, you force him to sit in the wreckage of his own projections. And in that wreckage, something strange begins. Not all men stay there. Most run. They reach for noise, for novelties, for numbness. But a few, a rare few, begin to listen. And the sound they hear first is her silence. Not the absence of voice, but the presence of truth. That's why years can pass, decades even, and he'll still pause at a scent, a sentence, a song, and wonder, why can't I forget her? It's because forgetting isn't an option when the memory lives not in the mind, but in the soul. He married another, laughed louder, moved on, but at 2 a.m., when the weight of the world quiets, her silence returns. Not as guilt, not as regret, but as a sacred wound. You see, not all wounds bleed. Some shimmer, some hum like a forgotten lullaby in the ribcage. The kind that never hurts, but never heals either. Because she didn't try to be his dream. She became his reflection, and no man forgets the mirror that made him blink first. What made her unforgettable wasn't her presence, it was her absence, wrapped in dignity. She didn't chase, she vanished, not to escape, but to evolve. And men, despite all appearances, feel that evolution like a thunderclap in their chest. Because the woman who detaches without drama does what centuries of conditioning told them was impossible, she walks away whole. Some women beg for closure. She became the closure. She stopped seeking understanding and became understanding itself. The living embodiment of a lesson unlearned. And still, he feels her. In his quiet triumphs, in his private defeats. She's not in his phone, not in his bed, not in his daily orbit, but she's in the pause before he says her name out loud and then swallows it. She's in the sigh he lets out when he's laughing with someone new, realizing it doesn't echo the same. That's the power of a woman who masters her energy. Not because she wants revenge, but because she finally realizes she was never meant to be a chapter in his story. She was the mirror forcing him to face his own. And Carl Jung would tell you, what we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate. She was fate, not the romantic kind, the kind that strips illusion from soul, the kind that carves a scar where truth once begged to be seen. So why do men remember the woman who said nothing? Because silence in the hands of a conscious woman isn't emptiness, it's presence. It is the collapse of performance, the end of manipulation, the beginning of truth. He will replay what she didn't say, more than what she ever could have said. Because silence is a doorway. And he never dared walk through. She stopped explaining. He started hallucinating, about what she meant, what she wanted, why she left. And in the endless echo of his own speculation, he learned the hardest truth of all: she didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she started loving herself. And the man who remembers her, doesn't remember her body, or even her voice. He remembers how she made his lies feel smaller. And his soul feel seen. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.